Hey guys, tonight we descend deep into the Valley of the Kings, where the air is dry, the cliffs are carved by millennia of winds. And beneath the sands lies one of history's most famous mysteries. Imagine yourself standing at the entrance to a tomb that had been sealed for over 3,000 years. The rocks around you radiate stored heat from the day, but the air below, drifting up from the shadowed staircase, is cool, almost damp, and carries the faint, musky scent of dust. You're about to step into the resting place of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this in real life. What with collapses, curses, and the possibility of a cranky ancient spirit waiting to file a complaint. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this little community stretch across the world now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch against fine grit as you descend the narrow steps into the tomb, the passage growing darker until torchlight becomes your only anchor. Each flame flickers nervously as if afraid of what waits below. The tomb of Tutankhamun, the Boy King, as he's sometimes called, was hidden beneath layers of rubble and forgotten for centuries, until archaeologist Howard Carter pried it open in 1922. What Carter found was astonishing. Walls still sealed with royal insignia, chambers packed with treasures, and the mummy of a pharaoh barely out of his teens. But you don't see all that at once. No. First comes the heavy silence. It's the kind that presses on your eardrums like you're underwater. Then, a carved doorway rises ahead, its plastered seals marked with jackals and hieroglyphs, warnings written in the language of gods. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's peace. One inscription supposedly read, though historians still argue whether that was ever truly written, or just the invention of hungry newspapers looking to sell a story. Either way, it makes you think twice about leaning on the wall. Your fingers trace the edges of the doorway. The plaster feels fragile, powdery, and for a moment you imagine how Carter must have felt. His team had spent years chasing dead ends only to stumble across this staircase beneath the rubble of another tomb. And now, after chiseling away centuries of sand and stone, they faced a sealed entrance that whispered of untouched wonders. Carter drilled a tiny hole, pushed a candle through, and peered inside. When asked if he saw anything, he famously replied, "Yes, wonderful things." That phrase, whispered in the shadows, still echoes as if you heard it yourself. Stepping through, you're struck by how small the chambers actually are. Tutankhamun was not a towering ruler of immense power. He was a boy thrust into kingship at around 9 years old, ruling barely a decade before dying around 18 or 19. His tomb, compared to grander pharaohs, feels modest, almost rushed, as if time itself cut short the plans for something bigger. Scholars still debate whether he was placed here hastily in a tomb not originally intended for him. The paint on the walls even shows signs of having been applied quickly, some of it blistered by dampness, as though the workmen were racing against the clock. The artifacts lie in haphazard splendor chariots jammed into corners. Thrones shoved aside, golden shrines stacked awkwardly like oversized furniture in a storage unit. Yet amid the clutter, the brilliance of the craftsmanship leaves you blinking. Imagine finding a single golden scarab in the dirt outside. That alone would define a museum. But here, thousands of objects, each gleaming with stories. Still, the silence reigns supreme. Every step you take is muffled, as though the tomb itself swallows sound. A scorpion skitters across the floor and vanishes into a crack. You try not to think about how the ancient builders might have left little surprises, hidden shafts, carved guardians, maybe even traps. Okay, probably not the swinging axe kind you see in video games, but still, enough to keep you alert. And above all, you sense eyes on you. Painted figures cover the walls, their colors surprisingly vivid. Gods with animal heads, priests raising their arms, Tutankhamun himself depicted as eternal. Their gazes never waver. In the flicker of your torch, they almost seem to move, the painted eyes following as you inch deeper. You're not alone here, not really. The deeper you go, the more you feel the weight of the earth above pressing down. Picture the limestone ceiling as a lid, the mountain itself holding its breath while you intrude. And yet, part of you can't help but smile. After all, this place survived looters, sandstorms, collapsing dynasties, and 3,000 years of silence only to be disturbed by you. Stumbling with sweaty palms, whispering jokes to keep from shivering. It's eerie, but it's also oddly comforting. You realize you're standing at the threshold of memory itself. Every scarab, every jar, every chipped statue is proof that someone, long ago, wanted Tutankhamun remembered. They believed that to speak his name aloud was to keep his spirit alive. And here you are, speaking it softly. In the stillness of his tomb, Tutankhamun, your torchlight dances across the chamber and lands on something that glitters a faint gleam of gold. Your heart skips. You take another step forward. The silence deepens, waiting for you to discover more. You take a slow breath, feeling the cool air settle in your lungs as you gaze around the cramped chamber. The silence nudges you forward, not toward the gold, not toward the treasures, but toward the story of the boy whose bones lie hidden just a few steps away. Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty, never had the chance to become the towering figure of legend like Ramses the Great or the architectural visionary like Hatshepsut. His reign was more a flicker than a flame, a fragile candle lit in a storm. And yet here you are, thousands of years later. Whispering his name, you imagine him as a child, maybe 9 years old, tugging nervously at the golden regalia far too heavy for his shoulders. The boy who should have been climbing trees, splashing along the Nile, or, let's be real, arguing with his tutor about boring scrolls, was instead wrapped in the suffocating cloak of divine kingship. His father, Akhenaten, had shaken Egypt to its core with a radical religious revolution, forcing the worship of a single god, the sun, dismantling centuries of tradition. That experiment didn't go over well. So when Akhenaten died, the fragile kingdom was left wobbling, desperate for a figurehead to stabilize the throne. Enter Tutankhamun, as he was first called, a small boy thrown into an arena of priests, generals, and politicians. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun had any true power at all. Some suggest he was a puppet, his hands guided by powerful advisors like Ai and Horemheb, men who whispered into his ear and made the real decisions. Others think the boy may have held a spark of authority, enough to restore the old gods and steady the throne for a time. What we do know is that early in his reign, he abandoned his father's heretical vision, changed his name to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun, and reopened the temples of the old faith. Imagine being a kid told to renounce your father's beliefs, change your name, and save a civilization. Yeah, your chores don't look so bad now, do they? Still, his reign was marked more by survival than glory. The ancient records suggest that Egypt was licking its wounds, trying to recover from years of upheaval. Foreign threats loomed, domestic unrest simmered, and the treasury wasn't exactly overflowing with gold. For Tut, it meant ruling a kingdom while growing through adolescence awkward enough. When you're not wearing a double crown and pretending to be a god, and then there's the question of his health. You picture him limping through palace halls, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. Archaeologists found more than 100 of these canes in his tomb, suggesting they weren't just accessories. Some modern examinations of his mummy reveal signs of physical deformities, perhaps a clubfoot. Maybe scoliosis, even traces of malaria. Life for Tutankhamun may have been far less glamorous than the golden statues suggest. It might have been a frail boy in pain, straining to appear strong before his people. And yet, despite these burdens, he left ripples in history. Restoring the worship of Amen stabilized Egypt, at least for a while, and reconnected the people with traditions they cherished. His reign, though short, marked a return to the old ways. A symbolic bridge between the chaos of Akhenaten and the military might of the rulers who followed. In a strange twist, it was his youth and fragility that made him significant. He didn't conquer empires or build pyramids. He survived long enough to symbolize healing. Imagine him in the palace at Thebes, the cool stone walls echoing with the shuffle of sandals. Incense smoke curling toward the painted ceilings, courtiers bowing low as a boy barely taller than their shoulders passed by. You can almost hear him sigh, the weight of his crown pressing on his brow, the murmurs of advisors in every ear. Oh, maybe. He found moments of escape drifting down the Nile in a gilded boat, playing with his young queen Ankhesenamun, who was, awkwardly enough, also his half-sister. Egyptian royal family trees are, let's say, complicated. But even that story carries a shadow. In his tomb, 2 tiny mummies were discovered, likely stillborn daughters, fragile as porcelain. They may have been his children, though scholars continue to debate it. Their presence hints at heartbreak within the golden halls, reminding you that behind every title, every divine symbol, was a family facing grief. So here stands Tutankhamun, frail, pressured, manipulated perhaps, but still remembered. Isn't it odd? So many powerful pharaohs built monuments stretching to the skies, carved their victories on stone walls, and yet their names fade in obscurity. Tut, with his brief life and modest tomb, is the one who lingers most vividly in modern imagination. Maybe it's because he was vulnerable, and vulnerability makes him relatable. Or maybe it's because his tomb remained hidden long enough to keep his treasures intact, creating a time capsule that stunned the world. Either way, the boy who probably struggled to walk across his palace courtyard without wincing is now eternal. You pause in the tomb's shadow, hearing the silence press closer. The walls seem to breathe with his story. And you realize you've just begun to scratch the surface of this young pharaoh's fragile reign. The glitter of gold around you is only the echo of his short, flickering life. The torchlight licks the walls, and you finally let your eyes settle on the treasures that crowd this chamber. It's almost overwhelming, like stepping into a pharaoh's private vault of dreams. Golden shrines rise taller than you, their surfaces etched with hieroglyphs so fine you wonder how any hand, mortal or otherwise, could carve them. Chairs inlaid with ivory lean against the walls, each leg shaped like a lion's paw. Each armrest ending in the head of a cobra, as if daring you to take a seat. And over there, tucked almost casually in a corner, is a gilded couch shaped like a divine beast. Imagine that sure everyday furniture shimmering in gold while you snack on figs. IKEA could never. You shuffle forward, your torch glinting off. Objects stacked in near chaos. That's one of the odd things about Tutankhamun's tomb. It doesn't look like a neatly staged museum gallery. Instead, it feels like someone tried to fit an entire palace into a closet. Chariots are wedged together, wheels pressing against statues, while boxes overflow with jewels and clothing. Historians still argue whether this messy packing was due to a rushed burial, or perhaps the tomb had been opened and hastily resealed by ancient looters. Either way, the result is dazzling clutter. A hoarder's paradise sect. Everything is made of gold. Your eyes catch on one of the smaller objects, a dagger with a blade that gleams with an otherworldly sheen. For years, scholars puzzled over its strange metallic composition until modern tests revealed the truth: it was forged from meteoric iron. Yes, you're staring at a blade literally fallen from the heavens. That alone feels like a cosmic flex. Imagine being buried with a star in your pocket. Then there are the statues. Black and gold figures stand guard at the chamber doors, their eyes wide, pupils painted so vividly they seem to follow you. They're guardians meant to protect the boy king as he crossed into the afterlife, but in the flickering light, they look a little too alive. Their glossy black skin gleams like obsidian, and their lips are frozen mid-breath. You step around them gingerly, trying not to offend anyone, especially anyone who's been standing still for over 3,000 years. Among the treasures, jars filled with oils and perfumes catch your nose even before your eyes. The faint, sweet trace of resin still lingers, clinging stubbornly across millennia. That's the kind of scent you don't forget. You picture priests anointing the young king, pouring fragrant oils onto linen wrappings, chanting prayers as they sealed him away. And now, here you are, inhaling a breath from their world. One mainstream fact historians agree on: Tutankhamun's tomb contained over 5,000 objects. From towering statues to sandals with delicate straps. The sheer variety paints a portrait of a boy king's life and his culture's obsessions with eternity. And it's not just the valuables, the everyday things matter too. You spot a small board game, something akin to ancient Egyptian chess, tucked into the pile. Imagine Tut sitting cross-legged, rolling knucklebones to move pieces across the board. Maybe cheating against his sister, just like any bored teenager. But here's a quirky tidbit. Nestled among the treasures were containers filled with food bread, seeds, even hunks of meat. Ancient Egyptians believed the dead needed sustenance in the afterlife, so they packed picnics for eternity. It's sweet, really, though judging by the dusty jars, you might want to skip taste-testing as you scan. The richness overwhelms you, but it also raises questions. Why so much? Why this dazzling display for such a young, relatively minor king? Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun's burial treasures were leftovers from other royals, repurposed in a hurry to fit his untimely death. Some think even the golden mask may have originally been crafted for someone else, possibly a queen. The craftsmanship is exquisite, yes, but little inconsistencies hint that not everything here was made just for him. It's like inheriting hand-me-downs, except the hand-me-down is a solid gold throne. You kneel before a chest inlaid with ebony and ivory, its lid painted with scenes of Tutankhamun hunting ostriches in the desert. His figure, slim and almost delicate, is shown striking with bow and arrow. The detail is so vivid you can almost hear the hooves of panicked animals, the twang of the bowstring, the shouts of attendants. Was this an idealized portrait, or did he truly ride out across the sands? With his frail body, historians doubt it. But that's the power of art in the tomb. It reshaped reality, painting Tut not as he was, but as he should have been: vigorous, victorious, eternal. You step back, nearly tripping over another box of treasures, and chuckle softly to yourself. It's absurd. Here you are, in a room packed tighter than your grandma's attic, except every object is priceless. You half expect to find a golden sock puppet lurking in the corner, but the laughter fades as you realize the truth. Each piece here was meant not for display, not for tourists, not even for history books. They were meant for him. For Tutankhamun, who would never touch them again. His sandals, his bow, his chariots, they became silent companions for a journey into the afterlife. And somehow, standing in this glittering chaos, you feel both awe and an odd, gentle sadness. The treasures gleam on, mute and eternal, as though waiting for him to return. And maybe, just maybe, you feel like an intruder in someone else's bedroom, Rifling through drawers meant never to be opened. The longer you linger in the tomb, the heavier the silence grows, until you start to notice the little whispers in the dark corners of your imagination. A shiver prickles at your neck, not from the drafty air, but from the weight of stories that cling to this place, the kind that come with a warning label. You remember the famous tale, The Curse of the Pharaohs. It began, as most curses do, with a handful of eerie coincidences and a lot of overactive human storytelling. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world gasped not only at the treasures, but at the supposed supernatural consequences. Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy backer who funded the dig, died just a few months later from an infected mosquito bite. Newspapers pounced on the story, splashing headlines about the curse of the mummy across the globe. They claimed that when Carnarvon died in Cairo, all the lights in the city mysteriously went out for a few minutes. Spooky timing. Sure, coincidence? It's almost certainly. But try telling that to a public already hungry for ghost stories as you wander between the statues. You almost hear the echoes of those headlines. Tales spread that strange accidents followed others connected to the excavation illnesses, car crashes, even sudden deaths. In truth, most of Carter's team lived long, uneventful lives. But the curse had already rooted itself in the world's imagination. Historians still argue whether the curse was born from ancient inscriptions taken out of context, or if it was just clever marketing by journalists eager to sell papers. Some even suggest Carter himself encouraged the rumors to keep looters and rivals away, and yet, as you breathe in the dusty air, you can't shake the thought. Ancient Egyptians did believe strongly in protecting the dead. They inscribed spells, prayers, and warnings on tomb walls and coffins to ward off anyone foolish enough to disturb eternal rest. Some were poetic, others blunt, threats of divine wrath, sickness, or death. It wasn't a Hollywood invention, it was part of their worldview. You could argue the real curse was simply guilt and paranoia gnawing at the edges of explorers. Who knew they were trespassing? You stop before one of the guardian statues, its obsidian face gleaming in the flicker of your light. Its eyes bore into you, and for a heartbeat, you half expect it to step forward, to raise its staff and remind you that you don't belong here. You laugh nervously, brushing off the thought, but the sound dies quickly, swallowed by the tomb. Ah, quirky little tidbit floats into your memory. When Carter's team first opened the burial chamber, they found a small clay tablet with an inscription, some interpreted as a warning. Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh. Dramatic? Right. Except that inscription has mysteriously never been located. Again, some think it never existed at all, a rumor cooked up by reporters. Others whispered that it vanished, like the tomb itself wanted to hide the evidence. And then there's the odd case of Carter's canary. The story goes that Carter kept a pet bird during the excavation. When the tomb was first opened, a cobra, symbol of Egyptian kingships, slithered into the cage and ate the bird alive. Locals gasp, calling it an omen, a warning from the gods. Rational minds shrugged it off after all. Cobras are common in Egypt, but still. You picture that moment, the golden mask of Tut glinting in the dark, and outside, a serpent devouring a bird. If that doesn't make your spine tingle, nothing will. As you shuffle deeper, your torch throws shadows that seem to slink just out of reach. The curse may not be real in the sense of magical lightning bolts, but in another way, it is. The moment you disturb a tomb like this, you step into a world where superstition and history entwine, where every cough, every flicker of the torch, every creak in the stone feels like the pharaoh clearing his throat at you. Historians still argue whether belief in curses influenced how the public consumed the discovery. Was the hype around Tutankhamun's tomb amplified by the treasures alone, or by the shiver-inducing rumors of death and doom? Either way, it worked. The world couldn't look away. Even today, Tutankhamun's name still conjures not just images of gold, but whispers of something uncanny, something that hums just out of reach. You pause by a chest filled with funerary figurines, little shabby statues meant to serve Tut in the afterlife. Their carved faces grin faintly, almost conspiratorially, as if they know something you don't. You mutter under your breath, half joking, "Don't worry, I'm not here to steal anything." Still, you can't help but wonder if the boy king had one last line of defense, one last flick of divine justice for intruders. Would you even know until it was too late? The silence presses in again. Maybe the curse is simply this: once you step into the tomb, you can never quite leave it behind. Your torchlight steadies, and finally, your gaze falls on the object that has become almost synonymous with Tutankhamun himself: death mask. It rests upon the boy king's mummy, a gleaming face of eternity staring serenely into the darkness. For a moment, you forget the cramped walls, the heavy silence, even the rumors of curses. There it is, 30 pounds of hammered gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, quartz, and obsidian. Glowing like captured sunlight, the mask is mesmerizing. Its eyes are wide, almond-shaped, with brows and lids traced in deep blue, making them seem perpetually alert. A striped Nena's headdress frames the face, with a cobra and vulture poised on the brow, the symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. Together, they whisper that Tutankhamun was not just a boy, not just a king, but the divine embodiment of a united land. And you can't help but think, he probably would have looked much less majestic in real life, hobbling with a cane and squinting in the sun. But here, in death, he is perfection itself. It's strange to think that this masterpiece wasn't meant for your eyes, or anyone's eyes, ever again. The artisans crafted it to guard Tutankhamun in the afterlife, to ensure that his spirit would recognize itself and navigate the perilous journey beyond death. Ancient Egyptians believed the mask was more than decoration. 'Twas a functional piece of magic. The lips, inscribed with protective spells, were thought to speak on his behalf before the gods. The gold itself carried divine meaning, perishable, eternal, the flesh of the gods. And yet, here's a quirky detail. Modern scans of the mask reveal that its face may not have been made for Tutankhamun at all. Some scholars argue the mask's features, especially the pierced ears and certain proportions, suggest it was originally crafted for a queen, possibly Nefertiti, and later repurposed when Tut died unexpectedly. Imagine being remembered for millennia by a face that maybe wasn't even yours. That's one awkward family hand-me-down. You lean closer, your breath fogging slightly in the chill of the chamber. And you can almost see your reflection merging with Tut's eternal gaze. Historians still argue whether the mask was intended to be a portrait or an idealized vision. Was it meant to look like the boy king himself, frail and delicate, or like Osiris, the god of the afterlife, eternal and flawless? Perhaps both, an overlap of human and divine, as though Tut's mortal features were elevated to godhood through gold. The mask itself has survived drama beyond the tomb. For decades after its discovery, it was admired by millions, but not without mishaps. In the 20th century, while being handled in Cairo, the mask's blue beard accidentally snapped off. The repair, let's just say, involved more glue than grace. The sloppy restoration caused public outrage when it came to light, proving that even in the modern world, Tutankhamun's treasures can still spark controversy. Imagine explaining to the gods, "Sorry, we tried fixing your eternal face with hardware store epoxy." And yet, standing here in the flickering light, you feel the mask's true gravity. It is not just a piece of art, not just an artifact. Is a bridge? A bridge between Tut and eternity, between Egypt and the modern world, between the living and the dead. Every detail, from the faint smile carved into the lips to the intricate patterns on the collar, was designed to speak across time. And here it is, speaking to you. You take a step back, letting the gleam wash over you. The mask radiates an odd calm, as though it's not just guarding Tutankhamun, but watching you as well, silently weighing your soul. You wonder if this was how the priests felt as they lowered it over his mummified face. Sawed, reverent, maybe, even a little frightened. To cover a teenager's fragile features with this immortal visage was to declare him more than human, to grant him a god's eternity. A joke slips into your mind almost as a defense. Imagine if, instead of a golden mask, he'd been buried with something less majestic, like a clay caricature. History would have been a lot less glamorous. But the thought fades quickly, replaced by the humbling awareness that you are standing before one of humanity's greatest creations. And yet, behind that perfect golden face lies the real boy, the fragile body twisted by illness, preserved in bandages. The mask hides him, transforms him, and in doing so, ensures that you will never quite know him. Tutankhamun remains both present and distant, his true face forever eclipsed by gold. The torchlight trembles again, and the mask seems to flicker with it, alive for just a heartbeat. You blink, and the illusion is going, but you carry the weight of that gaze with you, as though it has settled into your bones. The mask lingers in your mind even as you move past it, deeper into the shadows. Because behind the glow of gold lies the question everyone tiptoes around: how did Tutankhamun really die? He was barely out of adolescence, and in ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were supposed to stride into old age like sun gods. His death feels like a page ripped too early from a book. You imagine the scene: a palace in Thebes or Amarna, the boy king bedridden, priests murmuring prayers at the door, advisors pacing nervously as their young ruler fades. Was it a sudden accident or the slow drip of illness? Historians still argue whether Tut was a victim of foul play, a fragile body giving out, or simply bad luck at the wrong time. One popular theory paints his death as an accident. CT scans of his mummy reveal a fractured skull, sparking the rumor that he may have been struck down, perhaps murdered by an ambitious advisor like I, eager for the throne. For years, that crack in his skull seemed damning evidence. But modern science complicated the drama. The fracture may have happened after death, perhaps during Carter's excavation or while handling the brittle remains. In other words, Tut's head wound could be less royal assassination and more oops, archaeologist with a pickaxe. Another theory centers on his legs. Examinations showed Tutankhamun had a severely deformed left foot and possibly a clubfoot. Combined with signs of bone necrosis and more than 100 walking sticks in his tomb, it suggests he struggled to even walk without pain. Some researchers propose he suffered a fall, maybe from a chariot, causing fatal injuries. It's a tragic image, the golden boy king, toppling in a flash of speed and sand, never to rise again. Yet skeptics argue his health may have been too frail for him to even ride a chariot in the first place. And then there's malaria. DNA testing on Tut's mummy revealed traces of the parasite. Add that to his weak constitution, and you have a young ruler caught in a perfect storm. Genetic issues, bone disease, and one of the deadliest illnesses in human history. Imagine the fever, the chills, the weakness seeping through his thin frame. It may have been less dramatic than murder, but far more human. Of course, because history can never be simple, there are fringe theories too. Some claim Tut was poisoned. Others whisper about ritual sacrifice or even divine punishment for his father's heresy. It's like a true crime case that refuses to close, each theory adding more fog than clarity. The only certainty is that his reign ended suddenly, and his burial was rushed. The walls of his tomb bear evidence of moldy, blistered paint, suggesting they were hastily finished, still damp when sealed. Death came quickly, and the living scrambled to keep up. You pause before a funerary chest, its lid painted with images of Tutankhamun alongside gods. The artwork shows him healthy, strong, eternal, but you know better now. Beneath the golden mask lies a body that tells a different story. A fragile skeleton, thin ribs, twisted bones. It's a portrait of vulnerability hidden beneath layers of divine iconography. And here's a quirky detail. When his body was first unwrapped, researchers found his mummy in an unusual state. It appeared as though parts of it had been burned. Later studies suggest this wasn't foul play, but a chemical reaction caused by the oils used in mummification. Interacting with oxygen essentially, his body spontaneously combusted after burial. So yes, the poor boy king may have literally caught fire in his coffin. If ever there was a grim punchline to immortality, that's it. You take a breath, the dust prickling your throat, and realize that every theory about his death says more about the living than the dead. We project stories onto Tutankhamun because mystery is irresistible. Was he a victim of palace intrigue? A frail boy undone by disease? An unlucky soul struck by divine irony? The truth may never be pinned down. Historians still argue whether focusing on his death distracts us from his life. After all, Tutankhamun restored the old gods, brought stability after chaos, and became an enduring symbol. Yet the obsession lingers. Maybe because, deep down, we fear the same thing. That no matter how much gold surrounds us, no matter what legacy we try to carve, death can come too soon, too strange, too unexplained. You step back, the chamber pressing in on you, and glance toward the mask once more. It stares serenely, unconcerned with theories, debates, or rumors. The boy beneath the gold has already crossed whatever threshold lay beyond. It's the living archaeologists, historians, you who keep fumbling in the dark, trying to make sense of a story that ended too soon. You press deeper into the tomb, past the main chambers, where the walls feel closer, the air thicker, and the silence even more insistent. For years, whispers have circulated about what might lie beyond the painted plaster hidden chambers sealed away, waiting to be revealed. It's the kind of rumor that keeps archaeologists awake at night and makes you lean a little harder against the cold stone, wondering if there's more to this place than meets the eye. In 2015, radar scans of Tutankhamun's tomb made headlines. The results suggested voids behind the north and west walls, possible hidden rooms tucked away behind centuries of paint and plaster. The idea electrified the world. What if there was more to discover? What if the boy king's modest tomb was actually a gateway into something far greater? Some scholars speculated that another royal figure, perhaps the enigmatic queen, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun's stepmother, might be concealed beyond those walls. Imagine the world's cameras poised, ready to capture the second greatest archaeological discovery of the century just a few feet away. Historians still argue whether those radar scans were accurate. Some experts claimed the voids were nothing more than natural variations in the limestone, a geological trick of the desert bedrock. Others insisted the data was solid, hinting at doorways bricked over and plastered smooth. The debate became so heated you'd think it was an episode of reality TV, Egyptologists Gone Wild Radar Edition. To this day, no definitive hidden chamber has been revealed. The mystery lingers, unsolved, taunting us with the possibility of secrets just beyond reach. Still, the theory makes sense when you look around. Tutankhamun's tomb is unusually small for a pharaoh. Some believe his sudden death meant he was buried in a space never meant for him, possibly a side tomb within a queen's larger complex. The awkward layout, the cramped chambers, the rushed wall paintings, all of it hints at improvisation. It's as if the builders were caught mid-sentence and forced to finish the story in shorthand. If there are other chambers, they might belong to someone else entirely. Swallowed up by Tut's premature burial. You brush your hand against the painted wall. The scene depicting Tutankhamun embraced by Osiris, the god of the afterlife. The plaster feels cool, unyielding, but you can't shake the sensation that something lies behind it, a secret pressing its back against the wall, waiting for someone bold enough or foolish enough to break through. There's a quirky tidbit here, too. Some art historians noticed that the style of certain wall paintings doesn't quite match Tutankhamun's time period. The figures seem more feminine, the brushwork more delicate. Was the tomb originally painted for a queen, then hastily adapted for a king? If so, the idea of Nefertiti resting just beyond the chamber becomes more than fantasy. It feels like a possibility scribbled into the walls themselves, of course. Breaking into a pharaoh's tomb wall isn't exactly something you do on a weekend project. Preservation is delicate, and no one wants to risk damaging what's already been discovered. So the hidden chambers, if they exist at all, remain sealed. A riddle wrapped in gold leaf and plaster. You step back, the torchlight skimming across the painted figures, and try to picture the hidden space. Is it filled with more treasures, untouched shrines, and sealed jars of honey still sweet after 3,000 years? Or is it nothing but empty stone, a blank echo mocking our curiosity? Historians still argue whether the obsession with hidden chambers distracts from what's already here, one of the greatest finds in history, or whether it's precisely this sense of what if that keeps Tutankhamun's legacy alive. For now, the walls keep their secrets. You lean closer, press your ear against the plaster, and of course, you hear nothing, just the hollow hum of your own heartbeat. But the thought lingers as you step away. Somewhere in the silence, maybe another pharaoh still waits, tucked into the folds of this boy king's hurried tomb. You push on, deeper into the story, where the golden glow of Tutankhamun's treasures shifts from the monumental to the strangely intimate. Among the shrines, statues, and ceremonial artifacts, there's something far more personal. The objects that touched his daily life. The boy king might be long gone, but his socks are still here. Yes, socks. Woolen ones with little separate sections for sandals. Imagine slipping those on during a chilly desert night, and suddenly the pharaoh feels less like an untouchable figure of history and more like some kid trying to keep his toes warm. The tomb revealed hundreds of items that could only be described as personal clutter, except, of course, in Tutankhamun's world. Clutter meant gold-inlaid chariots, intricately carved board games, and ivory-handled hunting knives. Archaeologists cataloged everything. Jars of perfume whose scents have long faded, linen garments folded neatly, even walking sticks. Dozens of walking sticks, in fact. And here's the quirky part: historians still argue whether the abundance of canes meant Tutankhamun had a physical disability. Some medical studies of his mummy suggest he suffered from clubfoot and perhaps malaria, which would have made those sticks more than just fashionable accessories. But not everything was so practical. The young king also packed for leisure. There were ornate boxes filled with gaming pieces, a kind of ancient version of carrying your Xbox on a trip. Board games like Sonat weren't just for fun. They were tied to religious beliefs, representing the passage of the soul through the afterlife. You sit back and picture Tut hunched over the board, flicking pieces with a grin, probably muttering something about beating the gods themselves. And if he lost, well, that probably ended with him declaring divine interference. Tucked in among these everyday relics are also more tender traces. Tiny sandals so small they might have been for a child. Some speculate they belonged to his stillborn daughters, whose mummified remains were also discovered in the tomb. It's one of those moments where the glamour of gold gives way to something raw: grief etched in objects left behind, quiet symbols of a family that never got to grow. You almost feel like you shouldn't be looking. It's like you've wandered into a drawer someone meant to keep closed. And then there's the chest of cosmetics oils, ointments, and powders. Pharaoh or not, Tutankhamun had a skincare routine that would put most influencers to shame. Some jars contained black coal for eye lining. Not just for beauty, but for practical reasons. The mineral helped reduce sun glare and possibly ward off infection. Of course, imagine him applying eyeliner in a polished copper mirror, trying to nail the perfect wing while the court waited outside. You can almost hear one of his servants sigh, "Your Majesty, the banquet's already started." Historians still argue whether these personal artifacts tell us more about the man himself or about the culture that surrounded him. Was Tutankhamun pampered with every luxury because he was a pharaoh, or because he was too frail to live without them? Did he choose these objects himself, or were they carefully curated by priests and officials who knew he wouldn't need them for long? As you picture these artifacts lined up under flickering lamplight, it's easy to imagine the boy king as someone both regal and achingly human. The sandals, the canes, the socks, all of it feels like a whisper from across the millennia, saying, "I was here. I laughed. I struggled. I played." You trail your fingers over an invisible board game. Imagine rolling a set of ancient dice. And wonder if Tutankhamun would have let you win. Probably not. Pharaohs don't lose even in their own bedtime stories. Your gaze drifts from the delicate sandals and jars of ointment to something far more imposing: the golden chariots. They sit in pieces now, carefully reassembled by archaeologists like elaborate puzzles, but once they would have gleamed under the Egyptian sun, wheels cutting grooves into the desert sands. Imagine the sound: clattering hooves, creaking wood, and the rush of wind as Tutankhamun, no taller than a teenager, held the reins of divine horses bred for speed. There were 6 chariots in total, each one a masterpiece of engineering. Some were richly decorated with gold and silver, their frames light but strong, the kind of vehicle you'd expect for ceremonial parades. Others bore scars of use, scratched and dented in ways that suggest they weren't just made to sit pretty in a tomb. These weren't static ornaments, they were machines, alive once with motion. Archaeologists have often wondered, did Tutankhamun actually ride them? Or were they only symbolic, representing royal power and the eternal hunt in the afterlife? Historians still argue whether the boy king's physical ailments, the very ones hinted at by his walking sticks, would have allowed him to handle such fierce steeds. And here's the quirky tidbit: one of his chariots is sometimes considered the world's first known folding vehicle. Its wheels and frame were designed in a way that suggests it could be dismantled and packed for travel, a kind of ancient collapsible sports car. Imagine a pharaoh on the go, demanding "fold my chariot, time late for the afterlife." Not exactly Tesla, but still innovative for the Bronze Age. The chariots also carried layers of meaning beyond their practical use. They were symbols of conquest, hunting, and divine authority. Wall paintings across Egypt show pharaohs thundering into battle, bow drawn, enemies scattering before the power of both man and God. In Tutankhamun's case, whether or not he personally led such charges is debatable. Some scholars suggest his military adventures may have been more symbolic, staged for propaganda rather than lived reality. After all, a teenage king with fragile health probably wasn't cutting down foes on the battlefield. But perception mattered. Even if Tut never loosed an arrow in real combat, the mere image of him standing tall in a chariot projected strength to allies and enemies alike. Still, the wear and tear on certain chariots suggests they weren't only props. Perhaps he did ride them within palace courtyards or in controlled hunts. Imagine him gripping the reins tightly, hair whipping in the desert breeze. Priests and attendants watching nervously, ready to rush forward if their fragile pharaoh stumbled. You can almost hear his laughter carried across the sandbrief. Defiant, a boy refusing to be trapped by the frailty of his body. The craftsmanship itself was astonishing. Every piece, axles, spokes, reins, yokes, was designed not only for function, but for beauty. Gold sheeting covered the wooden frames, decorated with intricate scenes of Pharaoh smiting enemies or offering tribute to the gods. Even the harness, fittings for horses were adorned with faience and gilded details. You realize these weren't just vehicles. They were rolling shrines, extensions of royal divinity pulled by flesh and blood. Some theorize that one of these chariots might even hold clues to Tutankhamun's mysterious death. His body showed unusual injuries, including damage to the chest and fractures in the legs. A chariot accident has been floated as a possibility, a hunting mishap, perhaps, or a fall during a reckless ride. Of course, historians still argue whether these injuries happened during his lifetime or were caused centuries later by the botched mummification process. The debate keeps rolling on, much like those golden wheels once did. You lean closer, almost feeling the polished wood under your hands. It's easy to imagine yourself climbing aboard, your heart pounding, the desert stretching endlessly before you. But then a whisper of reality slips in. Tutankhamun may have never felt this thrill as you picture it. His body might not have let him. The chariots then become more like dreams carved into gold, a vision of what he could have been, if not trapped in a fragile frame. And yet, even as silent museum pieces, they still hold that pulse of possibility. The boy king might not have conquered empires, but his chariots outlived him, carrying his legend into your imagination. In a strange way, every time you picture them in motion, Tutankhamun rides again, eternally young, eternally defiant, forever at the reins. From the golden chariots, your eyes wander to another, quieter kind of object, the humble walking sticks and canes. At first glance, they don't dazzle like the gold mask or sparkle with gemstones. But linger with them for a while, and they reveal something far more intimate. The everyday struggle of a young king who reigned from a throne, yet needed support. Just to move across a room, over 100 canes and walking sticks were found, tucked inside the tomb. Some were simple and utilitarian, carved from sturdy wood worn smooth by use. Others were extravagant, sheathed in gold or inlaid with ivory, as if royalty required even its crutches to be works of art. Many showed signs of where the handles rubbed thin, the bases chipped. These weren't ceremonial props. They were companions, necessary tools that accompanied Tutankhamun through daily life. Archaeologists often debate why there were so many. Was it over-preparation for the afterlife? Or did Tut truly depend on them so much that he wore through dozens in just a few years? Historians still argue whether his deformities, clubfoot, scoliosis, and possibly a fractured leg that never healed, were the result of genetic inbreeding among royal bloodlines. The evidence is sobering. Tutankhamun may have been a divine ruler in title, but in body he was frail, often in pain, and reliant on these canes to stand at all. And here's your quirky tidbit. One of the canes wasn't merely functional, it doubled as a weapon. Its shaft concealed a bronze blade, transforming it from support stick to surprise dagger. Imagine the boy king leaning on it by day, then whipping it into a lethal blade if trouble arose. A mobility aid and self-defense tool in one, ancient multitasking at its finest. If modern infomercials existed back then, you'd definitely hear. But wait, there's more. The canes also expose the duality of Tutankhamun's life. To the public, he appeared as a god king, radiant and strong, standing in gilded chariots and commanding armies in carved reliefs. Behind closed doors, he may have limped, struggled with balance, and leaned heavily on these sticks. Every step a reminder that divine blood didn't guarantee divine health. You can picture palace servants quietly laying out his canes each morning, like one might lay out jewelry or robes, ensuring the pharaoh could make it through the day. Yet, in a way, the sticks also gave him agency. They weren't symbols of weakness, but of endurance. Every scuff and crack on their surfaces tells you that Tutankhamun pushed himself to keep moving. he didn't simply remain confined, he adapted. Some scholars even suggest he may have used certain canes to participate in hunts, with attendants helping steady him as he loosed arrows at game. Perhaps that explains why scenes of him hunting and riding were carved with such insistence. They reflected not only idealized propaganda, but also a real desire to transcend physical limits. One can almost imagine him, a young man of 16 or 17, leaning against a polished cane, trying to project regal composure while quietly pressing through the ache in his legs. The palace must have been filled with whispers and sidelong glances, courtiers questioning whether their king could embody strength, even as he leaned on carved wood to cross the floor. And yet, somehow, the boy still carried the mantle of Egypt. The sheer number of walking sticks buried with him also suggests preparation for the afterlife. If in eternity he was to stride through endless fields or traverse celestial rivers, he would need tools to walk without faltering. His priests must have thought, better to provide too many than too few. And so, they stacked them beside his golden mask and treasures, a quiet admission that even kings needed help standing tall. As you look at these canes, there's an odd intimacy in the thought. Unlike the grand treasures meant to impress gods and intimidate mortals, these items are personal, close to the skin, shaped by constant touch. They let you glimpse not the myth of Tutankhamun, but the boy imperfect, struggling, yet stubbornly living each day. The truth is, every scuffed cane in that tomb tells you more about his life than all the gold combined, and maybe that's the lasting paradox of Tutankhamun's treasures. The chariots shouted of power he may never have wielded. The mask proclaimed divinity he may never have felt. But the walking sticks, they whispered the truth of his humanity. And in that whisper, strangely enough, he becomes more real, more relatable than any polished relic could ever make him. You drift now from the practical world of walking sticks into something far stranger. The tiny coffins and jars that held Tutankhamun's unborn children. It's not an image you usually associate with glittering treasure, yet tucked away within that lavish tomb were two miniature mummies, each carefully wrapped, each placed in its own carved coffin, and stored in a small wooden box as though the pharaoh couldn't bear to part from them. The coffins themselves are works of art. Tiny replicas of the kind adults would be buried in, with gilded faces and delicate details. When Carter first found them, he wasn't sure what he was looking at. Were they dolls, models, ritual objects? Only later examination revealed they contained human remains, two stillborn daughters of Tutankhamun and his queen, Ankhesenomon. Their sizes suggest one was around 5 or 6 months into pregnancy, the other closer to full term. Neither survived. It's sobering, isn't it? In a tomb otherwise bursting with gold and power, the most fragile artifacts are these two little bodies, tucked away like a private grief hidden inside a public monument. For Tutankhamun, whose own life was so short and precarious, losing children must have been another cruel blow. And for Ankhesenomon, his young wife, she was perhaps only a teenager herself, the sorrow would have been enormous. Historians still argue whether this was a gesture of affection or ritual duty. Were the children buried with Tut so that they might accompany him in the afterlife? Or was it simply the custom to enter the stillborn royals alongside their father? Some fringe theories even suggest the girl's presence hints at darker palace intrigues, questions of fertility, legitimacy, and succession. But the mainstream view holds simpler. They were his children, and in death he kept them close. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Even in miniature, the coffins were made with astounding craftsmanship. Tiny amulets were placed beside the mummified fetuses, as if these little souls might need protection from evil forces on their own journey to the afterlife. Imagine the priests carefully reciting spells not just for the king, but for these two small beings who had barely entered the world. It's both heartbreaking and oddly tender. a rare glimpse of softness inside a tomb otherwise designed to project grandeur. You can almost feel the weight of the silence when Carter's team opened those coffins in the 1920s. There's grandeur in discovering golden chariots, of course, but there's something heavier about uncovering grief so carefully preserved. You picture the boy king's court mourning privately, hiding their sorrow behind the stone walls while still putting on the mask of divine strength in public. And yet, when the tomb was sealed, someone decided these tiny lives mattered enough to rest forever with their father. The mummified daughters also remind us of the fragility of Tutankhamun's dynasty. His death without a living heir left Egypt in turmoil. The royal bloodline thinned. Dynastic marriage tangled itself into genetic knots, and with no strong successor, the once mighty line crumbled. The presence of these small coffins, then, is more than tragedies, a symbol of what never came to pass. If one of those girls had lived, the history of Egypt might have unfolded very differently. And here's where the reality check bites. The grand legacy of Tutankhamun is built not on his life's achievements, but on his death and what survived him. His reign was brief, his body weak, his heirs non-existent. Yet because his tomb was sealed and forgotten, he achieved an immortality his forebears never imagined. The tiny mummies beside him are silent witnesses to that paradox: loss in life, endurance in death. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? The tomb is a treasure chest of dazzling power, but the objects that stay with you longest aren't always the gold masks or jeweled daggers. Sometimes it's the small, quiet things, the walking sticks, worn by use, or the little coffins filled with dreams that never unfolded. They cut through the grandeur and bring you face to face with something startling. Pharaohs were still human, still vulnerable, still subject to heartbreak. As you picture the two tiny coffins resting beside Tutankhamun in the dim silence of his chamber, the treasure suddenly feels less like a monument and more like a family tomb. In the hush of the Valley of the Kings, amid the sand and the stone, a young king and his daughters remain together. Their story is unfinished, but their presence lingers, reminding you that even in the age of gods in gold, grief carved its place in history. The silence of those tiny coffins still clings to you as you wander deeper into the tomb. Past the glimmering mask, the shrines, the chariots, and the walking sticks, another category of treasures emerges: objects so odd that Carter himself must have raised an eyebrow when he catalogued them. Because for all the solemnity of pharaonic death, Tutankhamun's tomb also contained the unexpected: board games, toys, and instruments. It's like peeking inside a teenager's bedroom that just happens to be wrapped in gold. You notice the small wooden game boards first. Sanat, the ancient Egyptian favorite, is laid out neatly with tiny carved pieces ready to move. It looks almost like an ancestor of backgammon. The Egyptians believed Sanat wasn't just fun, it was spiritual practice. Winning meant mastering the passage through the afterlife, guiding your soul safely past traps and demons to eternal bliss. It's a reminder that even in leisure, everything was tied to destiny. Historians still argue whether Sanat was played purely for amusement or as a ritual rehearsal for death, but either way, Tut was clearly meant to pass eternity rolling those little sticks and moving his tokens across the board. Then come the musical instruments. Harps, trumpets, and curious sistra, kind of sacred rattle, were tucked away like party favors for Tuck. My Tuck was Cordio pays for the next world. One trumpet, made of silver, was actually blown during the 1930s by a soldier at Cairo radio, producing a brassy, haunting note that supposedly echoed across the city. People later whispered that disasters followed whenever it was played, linking it to the infamous curse of the pharaoh. Quirky, definitely. Spooky. Well, maybe, though. You can imagine ancient priests shaking their heads at the idea of their sacred horn being treated like a stage prop. Here's the fun part: toys. Yes, actual playthings in the tomb of Egypt's most famous king. Wooden animals on wheels, like little pull-along ducks and lions, probably belonged to Tut when he was a child. Imagine him tugging those across polished palace floors. The golden boy king, just a toddler, giggling with his toys. That image feels far more real than any mural of him smiting enemies or towering over captives. It's almost absurd among the golden jewels of eternity. You stumble across what amounts to an ancient daycare box. Of course. Scholars debate whether some of these objects were Tut's personal belongings or symbolic gifts meant to accompany him into the afterlife. Were the board games ever really played, or were they ritually new, waiting for the afterlife's first move? Were the toys his childhood favorites, or merely emblems of eternal youth? Nobody can say for sure, and maybe that's part of their charm. You're left hovering between intimacy and enigma, holding both truths in your hands. Even more curious are the exercise equipment and hunting gear. Tut had a kind of ancient gym kit tucked away in his tomb. Throwing sticks for hunting birds, practice bows. Even boomerang-like weapons were found piled near his other belongings. Some historians wonder whether he actually used them, considering his physical disabilities. Did attendants stage hunts for him, carrying him in a chariot so he could fire a few arrows before they helped him back down? Or were these simply symbols of royal masculinity meant to project vigor in the next world, even if his body on earth was frail? The debate continues. A mix of practicality and propaganda. One quirky tidbit. The Egyptians also packed Tut with a set of board games that were essentially the monopoly of their time games designed to teach strategy, patience, and luck. Imagine Tutankhamun groaning after losing a round, swearing softly under his breath in hieroglyphics. Of course, while his courtiers tried to let the boy king win. The fact that these were entombed with him suggests the gods, too, might enjoy a little downtime entertainment, and here's your open-ended thought for the night. Does immortality require laughter? You get the sense that Tut's tomb wasn't just about solemn processions, and divine judgment. It was also about comfort. Board games for the long nights, instruments to keep the halls lively, toys to remind him of innocence. In a way, it feels like the Egyptians were hedging their bets. Sure, you might face cosmic crocodiles in the underworld, but if you're stuck waiting in line for eternity, better pack a travel game, so as you stand in that chamber, surrounded by the playful echoes of 3,000 years ago, you realize Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't only a monument to wealth or religion. It was a time capsule of everyday joys. The laughter of games, the hum of a harp string, the wobble of a child's toy wheel sealed in gold and dust, waiting for you to notice. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real treasure. The reminder that even kings wanted to play. You leave behind the toys and trumpets and drift deeper into the tomb's quieter corners, where objects sit that never sparkle in the postcards or documentaries. These are the tools, jars, and daily-use items that might seem humble compared to a golden mask, but they carry a peculiar intimacy, like stumbling upon someone's favorite mug or well-worn shoes. They whisper about routines, about the soft fabric of ordinary life that clung even to a pharaoh. Your gaze lingers on the cosmetic jars first. Crafted from alabaster, they glow faintly in the lamplight, their lids still sealing in traces of ancient oils and perfumes. Imagine the aroma of frankincense or lotus lingering faintly inside 3,000 years old, and yet, on some level, still alive. Egyptians considered scent divine. The gods themselves were said to smell sweet. For Tut, those jars weren't vanity, they were necessary gear for eternal appeal. Historians still argue whether the oils found in his tomb were for ritual offerings or for Tut's personal grooming. But either way, the boy king was destined never to face eternity smelling anything less than fabulous. Nearby lie razors and grooming tools. Yes, Tutankhamun had his own afterlife shaving kit. The Egyptians valued smooth, youthful skin, often shaving body hair to emphasize purity. Imagine some underworld barber waiting patiently, hoping the pharaoh tips well for an afterlife trim. It's oddly charming that among all the gold, the young king still needed a good shave. Then you notice sandals. Lots of sandals, over 90 pairs, tucked away in boxes and chests. Some are plain reed sandals, the kind any farmer might have worn trudging along the Nile. Others dazzle with gold and inlaid gems, showing off the pharaoh's status even in footwear. One quirky detail: a pair was decorated with images of bound foreign captives underfoot, so Tut literally walked on his enemies. That's confidence and, perhaps, a touch of teenage pettiness. Still, the sheer number suggests he was well prepared. You can almost hear him sighing. One does not simply enter eternity with only one pair of shoes. More unexpected still are the jars of honey and baskets of seeds. Honey never spoils, making it a practical snack for a pharaoh on his eternal journey. Seeds, meanwhile, symbolized regeneration, the promise that life, like crops, would return after death. Imagine the god Osiris nodding approvingly as Tut unpacks his celestial picnic basket. Historians debate whether these provisions were symbolic or meant for literal nourishment. But either way, they represent a quiet tenderness, the human instinct to pack snacks. Even for the afterlife. There are also writing tools, reed pens, ink palettes, and rolls of papyrus. These suggest Tutankhamun might have continued his kingly duties in the afterlife, signing decrees, drafting letters, maybe even doodling when things got boring. Or perhaps they were symbolic, ensuring he could communicate with the gods. A fun fringe theory proposes they were included so scribes could record his victories in eternity, even if his earthly reign was short. Whatever the case, the image of the young pharaoh jotting notes by flickering divine torchlight has a gentle absurdity to it. And then come the chairs. Not thrones, not ceremonial seats, but actual chairs for sitting, reclining, maybe even napping. One beautifully crafted folding stool could almost pass for a trendy piece in a modern minimalist apartment. It's like Tutankhamun anticipated the need to lounge comfortably in eternity. After all, even kings get tired of standing. You might find yourself chuckling at the ordinariness of it all. Perfume jars, razors, sandals, snacks, chairs. It's the eternal version of packing your suitcase before a trip. Tut's tomb wasn't just about pomp and spectacle. It was also about making sure he had his creature comforts, the small rituals that made life feel normal. And that makes him oddly relatable. Strip away the gold, the politics, the divine titles, and you're left with a young man who wanted to smell good, wear nice shoes, snack on honey, and relax in a chair. Here's the scholarly debate to chew on. Were these everyday items really used by Tutankhamun in life? Or were they crafted fresh for his burial? If they were used, you're essentially staring at his personal belongings, his favorite sandals, his daily perfume, his chair with the faintest imprint of where he sat. If they were symbolic, then you're looking at a carefully curated fantasy of what his life should have been. Either way, they form a bridge between the glittering myth of kingship and the ordinary humanness of existence. As you let that sink in, you realize something calming. Death, at least to the Egyptians, wasn't a sudden departure into strangeness. It was a continuation of life's rhythms. You eat, you dress, you sit, you groom, you write just as you did before. The difference is, you do it forever. With gods watching and everything smelling faintly of lotus oil. And maybe that's the secret hidden in these humble objects. The great Tutankhamun, so mythologized, was also just a person. A young man who packed for eternity not only with gold masks and divine statues, but with his sandals and shaving kit. Suddenly, the tomb feels less like a museum and more like a suitcase left open, belongings waiting to be picked up again. You drift past the sandals, chairs, and honey jars, and your eyes are drawn back to the objects that glitter even in the soft glow, the symbols of power. They rest quietly, almost smugly, as if reminding you that while sandals are useful, crowns and staffs are what make a king truly king. These pieces aren't just decoration, they are charged with meaning. Little portable speeches about divine rule and eternal authority. First, the crook and flail. You've seen them crossed on Tutankhamun's golden mask, but here they lie in their actual form. The crook curves gently, a shepherd's staff that speaks of care and guidance. The flail, with its 3 dangling strands, suggests discipline, authority, and the ruler's role as provider of harvest. Together, they whisper the paradox of kingship, gentle protector and stern enforcer in one set of hands. Historians still argue whether these items were ever used practically or made purely as ceremonial props. But the craftsmanship suggests they were more than theater, they were statements of divine legitimacy. Next comes the crowns. Not just one Tutankhamun's tomb contained multiple headpieces. There's the blue war crown, sleek and rounded, which pharaohs wore in battle or when showing off military might. There's also the white crown of Upper Egypt, the red crown of Lower Egypt, and occasionally a double crown merging both. Imagine the young king, barely out of his teens, trying on each in turn like a child raiding a dress-up box. It's almost endearing. But it's also powerful. Each crown linked him not only to his earthly territory, but to cosmic balance itself. And then, the scepters. Tutankhamun's tomb had several, carved from wood, ivory, and even gold. Some were inscribed with protective spells, others adorned with figures of gods. The scepter, tall and topped with a stylized animal head, symbolized dominion over chaos. Picture Tut striding through the underworld with his scepter, like a cosmic bouncer keeping disorder at bay. If sandals made him human, the scepters made him untouchable. One curious object tucked among these was the ankh-looped crosses representing life. Tutankhamun's tomb included amulets and carvings of ankhs, symbols so enduring that even today it feels familiar, like a hip jewelry trend that never died. Imagine walking into eternity, literally holding the symbol for life in your hands. Fringe theorists like to joke that maybe these ankhs weren't symbolic at all, but ancient power sources. Egyptian batteries glowing with some lost energy. Serious historians roll their eyes, but the idea lingers because there's something irresistible about the thought of a divine USB stick plugged straight into immortality. Another striking piece is the throne, gilded with gold leaf and decorated with scenes of the young pharaoh with his queen, Ankh-Isanamun. Unlike the rigid images of pharaohs smiting enemies, this chair shows tenderness, a young couple, him in casual sandals, her applying ointment to his skin. It's a shock of intimacy, like finding a royal selfie in the middle of all the ceremony. Historians still argue whether this was propaganda or genuine affection, but either way, it humanizes the golden boy king. Everywhere, power symbols overlap with divine imagery. Falcons representing Horus clutch at crowns. Cobras rear up as Urius emblems, promising fiery protection. Scarabs are carved into scepters, eternal reminders of rebirth. Each object isn't just ornament, it's a coded message to the gods. A kind of visual password system granting the pharaoh safe passage into eternity. And yet, as you take in the glitter, you realize how small and fragile the objects actually are. The crook and flail can fit in your arms. The crowns, when lifted, are surprisingly light. These aren't unmovable monuments, but delicate tools, designed to be handled, worn, and carried. Power, it turns out, is portable and ephemeral. A quirky tidbit. Some of the gold on these pieces wasn't pure, but alloyed with copper or silver, which gave it different tones and textures. To the Egyptians, this didn't diminish the power of gold, expanded its symbolic palette. Gold was the flesh of the gods, immune to decay. By mixing metals, artisans weren't cutting corners. They were painting eternity with subtler shades. Imagine Tut's head gleaming not just with yellow brilliance, but with the faint blush of rose gold. Timeless and weirdly trendy. One more. Curiosity. Several of the ceremonial staffs are short, almost comically so. Some scholars argue they were made for Tut's small stature. Others think they were symbolic miniatures, easier to pack into a crowded tomb. Historians still argue. Whether these were functional walking aids, Tut suffered from a clubfoot and bone disease, or whether they were strictly symbols. Either way, there's poignancy in picturing the boy king leaning on a staff, its gilded head catching the desert sun halfway between divine symbol and medical necessity. In the end, these objects of power feel like a costume wardrobe for eternity. Each crown, each staff, each scepter allowed Tutankhamun to slip into a role: shepherd, warrior, god-king, beloved husband. It's theater, yes, but theater that never ends. A play where the audience is the gods and the stage is the eternal night of the afterlife. You step back, a little dazed, realizing that power isn't just about ruling. It's about symbols that endure when you're gone. And Tutankhamun, wrapped in gold and crowned in falcon feathers, ensured that his script would never be forgotten, even if, ironically, the boy himself would fade into mystery for millennia. You shuffle deeper into the chamber, past the crowns and scepters. And at last, you find yourself standing before the great enigma itself, the sarcophagus and coffins of Tutankhamun. Everything you've seen so far, from sandals to chariots to thrones, has been building toward this moment, the heart of the tomb. It looms quietly in the dim light, a stone box within boxes, a nesting doll of eternity. The outer sarcophagus is carved from quartzite, heavy and solid, a reminder that even death requires good masonry. Within it were not one, not two, but 3 coffins stacked like Russian dolls, each more exquisite than the last. The outer 2 are gilded wood, impressive enough that any other king would have stopped there. But the innermost, that was hammered from solid gold, weighing nearly 110 kilograms. Yes, you heard that right, a teenager was tucked into a coffin that could bankrupt a small kingdom today. You can almost imagine the priests heaving it into place, muttering, "You probably won't survive this," under their breath as their backs gave out on the golden coffin. The young king is shown holding the crook and flail, his face serene beneath the striped Nena's headdress. The details are delicate. The inlaid glass and semi-precious stones shimmer even after 3,000 years. And of course, inside this final shell lay the body itself, swaddled in layers of linen and adorned with amulets, each chosen for its magical properties: scarabs, ankhs, protective eyes, all the spiritual equivalent of bubble wrap to safeguard the fragile soul on its cosmic journey. Then comes the piece de resistance, the famous golden mask. Almost 15 kilograms of solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and obsidian. The mask wasn't just decoration, it was a passport designed to transform the boy into Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Its serene face, with almond eyes and faint smile, feels uncannily alive, as if Tut himself is watching you from across millennia. The mask has become so iconic, you forget it was meant to stay hidden forever, buried in darkness, never intended for the eyes of the living. But not everything about this burial screams perfection. Sharp-eyed scholars have noticed that some of the coffins and even the mask might not have been made originally for Tut at all. Historians still argue whether parts were recycled from a female pharaoh, possibly Nefertiti herself. The proportions of the mask's ears, some claim, look feminine. The outer coffin shows stylistic differences that don't quite match Tut's reign. If true, it means the boy king was buried in a hurry, cobbled together with second-hand royal gear. Talk about hand-me-downs. You thought borrowing your sibling's hoodie was awkward? And then there are the lingering mysteries about Tutankhamun's body itself. When Carter first opened the tomb, the mummy was in terrible shape. Some early theories suggested Tut was murdered, struck on the back of the head. Others proposed he died in a chariot accident. His body literally burned in the coffin because of a chemical reaction between oils and oxygen. Historians still argue whether his death was a tragic accident, an illness, or palace intrigue. The truth is, no one knows for certain. He was just 18 or 19 age where, today, you'd be fumbling with car keys, not ruling an empire. What is clear, though, is that this burial, improvised or not, worked. Tutankhamun achieved exactly what all the treasure promised: immortality. The irony is that he wasn't remembered as a great warrior or a brilliant statesman, or even a long-lived ruler. His fame rests on being forgotten so thoroughly that his tomb escaped the looters only to be rediscovered intact in the modern age. It's a kind of cosmic, joke eternal renown by accident. Quirky tidbit: CT scans of Tut's body revealed he had buck teeth and a slightly clubbed foot. Imagine the Golden Boy King hobbling around palace halls, still loaded with scepters and crowns, looking more like an awkward teen than a god incarnate. Yet here he is, immortalized in the most glamorous death ensemble in history. You can't help but smile at the contrast-tange awkwardness wrapped in divine gold, so you stand there, in that chamber of coffins, listening to the silence. Everything about this moment feels staged for eternity, a play with no audience. Until you arrived. You trace the outlines of the mask in your mind, the weight of the golden coffin, the secrecy of the amulets tucked away in the wrappings. It all whispers the same message: power fades, lives end, but stories endure. Tutankhamun, the forgotten king, became eternal not because of what he did in life, but because of the treasure that cloaked his death. As you finally turn away, you realize the journey has come full circle, from sandals and honey jars to crowns and masks, from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Each artifact was a piece of the same puzzle: how to outwit death, how to cling to eternity. And though Tutankhamun himself may never have imagined millions of people whispering his name as they drift to sleep, here you are, carrying him forward into the quiet night. And now, let the glitter fade. The golden mask, the jewels, the shining coffins, all dim, like stars sinking beyond the horizon. You step slowly back, leaving the tomb to its silence, the air cool and still around you. The treasures stay behind, wrapped in darkness, patient as they've always been. Your breathing softens, deepens. The hum of the world outside fades away. Picture yourself floating, gently, as if carried on the slow current of the Nile at night. The water is calm, reflecting moonlight in silver ripples. The reeds sway faintly on the banks. The desert is quiet, hushed, timeless. Each breath carries you further into stillness. The weight of crowns, coffins, and history slides away, leaving you lighter. You're no longer in the tomb, no longer wandering the desert of memory. You're simply here, resting safe. So close your eyes. Let your mind drift like golden sand shifting in the wind. Let the treasures of Tutankhamun sink back into shadow. You don't need to carry them, they'll be waiting, always. For now, there's only peace. Sleep comes slowly, like a warm tide. You surrender to it, and the story fades into silence.